Meet the new Panasonic S5, the new entry-level full-frame Lumix camera and the natural step up in the lineup for GH5 owners who want to move to full frame. I want to start this video by making sure we just keep a little bit of perspective when talking about this camera, because this is Panasonic's entry-level full-frame model. And it's being announced at a time when we've just spent the last month really focused down on the new Sony a7S Mark III and Canon R5, two hugely exciting flagship mirrorless cameras with features that far exceed what we see here on the S5. But so they should. I mean, they cost twice as much. Panasonic already have the camera to compete with them, the S1H. The S5 just isn't designed to go up against those. Instead, this goes up against Canon's EOS R and RP and Sony's a7 III. And in that competition, this is a very practical and well thought out offering from Panasonic. So, let's start with the physical size. This thing is so much smaller than the S1 and particularly their S1H. It's actually even slightly smaller than the GH5. It feels great to hold in the hand, much more compact and comfortable, but still large enough that it feels robust and your little finger doesn't hang awkwardly below the camera or anything like that. This does bring a few drawbacks as well though. The full-size Hdmi port we all loved on the GH5 has now gone unfortunately, and we get a micro one instead. There's no top screen like there is on the S1 and S1H, and it uses a new type of battery. This is a very similar battery to the GH5 one, but it's not the same. GH5 batteries won't work with the S5. It needs these new ones. GH5 ones won't actually even fit. But the new batteries will work in the GH5, interestingly enough, and will give GH5 users that extra little bit of battery life as they are higher capacity. We get two card slots, both SD, and yes, you can record to both of them simultaneously for dual recording, no problem. And you also won't need media that's that fast for the record modes of this camera. You should be fine with V60 SD cards, which will keep your media costs down nice and low. The EVF is perfectly fine, nothing special at 2.3 million dots, but at this price point, you wouldn't expect much more. It definitely will get the job done. Lens-wise, we've paired the camera here with Panasonic's new 20 to 60mm full frame zoom, which is the kit lens you can buy with the camera. And I've got to say, for what is essentially just a kit lens option with a variable aperture, it's actually a really nice lens. If you're thinking of getting this camera, I would definitely recommend ordering the version with the lens. As for a full frame lens, it's remarkably small and light and just really well balanced with the camera. Its autofocus performance seems great, and being able to go as wide as 20mm rather than the normal 24 we see on most other full-frame standard zooms is incredibly welcome. Panasonic have taken what could easily have been such an uninteresting and ordinary kit lens and actually given us a really practical option here. I kind of wish Sony and Canon had a lens like this one for RF or E-mount. But anyway, back to the camera itself. It's a 24.2 megapixel sensor with a dual native ISO of 640 and 4000 when in log. So the high ISO performance is very respectable. We get IBIS like on most of their other cameras, and it's rated up to 6.5 stops. The IBIS has always been good on Lumix cameras, and this one is no exception. It's one of the smoothest systems on the market. Record formats are nothing too exciting in today's landscape, but they do manage to one-up the relevant competition in one main area. You do get 10-bit 4K internally, but it's time limited to 30 minutes. Swap over to 8-bit though, and you can record as long as you want. You also get 4K 50 and 60p, but these are cropped into APS-C like we've seen on all the other Lumix cameras, and they're also limited to 30 minutes record time. All of these options are in long op. There's no all-eye in this camera, unfortunately, which is a bit of a disappointment. Not that most of its main competition has all-eye though, it's worth pointing out, so that perhaps is a bit unfair of me. The a7 III doesn't, for example, but the GH5 does, and this camera will be popular with GH5 users who want to upgrade to full frame. But that upgrade in sensor size won't be without compromises, and losing all-eye will probably be the biggest one for GH5 users. I still definitely think the upgrade will be worth it for a lot of people though, and we're making a video just for people looking to upgrade from the GH5, so keep an eye out for that in the next few days. If you need all-eye 10-bit though, there's always the HDMI port. Even though it's a micro one, it can still do 4K 10-bit 422. Plus, in the future, Panasonic will be releasing a firmware update, probably later this year, that will actually enable 5.9K RAW out over this HDMI port. And that came as a big surprise to me. That will really elevate the picture quality that this camera is able to achieve, and it should be S1H level in terms of image quality. The next big area that we need to talk about is autofocus. Recently, it's become Panasonic's main weakness. With the GH5, GH5S, S1, S1H, they've all just had update after update trying to improve how effective the contrast-based autofocus is. As soon as this camera was teased, people were asking about autofocus, with some even saying all they need to do is upgrade the autofocus and they'll upgrade. Well, they have improved the autofocus, but perhaps not in the way you would expect. Most manufacturers are using a form of hybrid autofocus for video between phase detect and contrast-based autofocus. And that's one of the big reasons we've seen autofocus become such a big deal on cameras like Canon and Sony. Panasonic have always just used contrast-based autofocus, and the S5 does not change that. It's still contrast-based. What they've done instead is completely redesign from the ground up their autofocus algorithms, and they do seem to have done a fantastic job at addressing the inherent weaknesses of contrast-based autofocus. Use the right settings and modes, and the tracking is smooth and natural. Those pulsing backgrounds we know from contrast-based autofocus happen much less, and the back and forth focus check is mostly gone as well. It is much better, and in the right modes can definitely be used professionally. But it's not quite as simple as it is on some other cameras. We've done a bunch of tests going through each mode, comparing it to other cameras and trying to get some first impressions of how you might go about getting the best from the camera, because which mode the camera is in does significantly change the autofocus performance. We'll release that as a separate video in the next few days. But this is definitely a big improvement over what we've seen from Panasonic's autofocus before. But it's not as good as the hybrid autofocus systems from Canon and Sony, but it is the best contrast-based autofocus we've seen yet. So, with the S5, you get decent full-frame 4K up to 30 frames a second, 4K 60p with the Super 35mm crop, better low light performance over the GH5, Vlog included, fantastic image stabilization, and even full-size XLR inputs with their top unit. Yes, it's only long op, not all eye like the GH5 was, and yes, it doesn't have quite as exciting flagship features as the higher end mirrorless cameras hitting the market, but in its price point, the S5 is looking like one of the most sensible and practical options on the market. We're going to be releasing some more videos going a bit more in depth on the S5 over the next few days, so keep an eye out for those. And of course, if you want to order an S5 for yourself, then just head over to proav.co.uk. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.